Okay, now you should at least have some practice with a few of the on-set practices. Let's say you as a visual effects soup have made it through the production phase and are now going to post. So, what now? Let's say you are doing a stereo production. You need to understand how it works before you are able to supervise it. So, let's begin first with the very definition of a stereoscopic production. So, as you can read, a stereoscopic production basically involves the creation of a film with an added depth factor to it. In other words, creating a story world with the illusion of depth, much like in our world where we perceive the varying distances between objects near and far. So on that note, stereoscopic post-production hence involves the creation, editing, or enhancement of the stereoscopic footage and photography captured from a stereoscopic production. In other words, it involves additional depth and raw data in post to work with in order to release a final 3D film. Now, although I do have a fair bit of experience in stereoscopic post-production, I do not claim to be an expert in this area, and am only sharing with you what I know through or from other experts in the field. So, with stereoscopic post-production pipeline, again, this changes depending on whether the production shot stereo or mono film to then be converted to stereo later. If the production shot flat and want to do stereo in post, then usually a conversion process is involved. Since the conversion process is largely dependent on the visual effects vendor and you as an aspiring visual effects soup have no control over the process, I would not be wasting your time and going through how that works. Instead, I'll walk you through the workflow of, in this context, a production that used a stereoscopic camera to film and gather raw footage, and how that converts to what happens in post, just so you as a visual effects soup on set know what happens behind the scenes after your job on set is done. So, depending on the type of camera and how the stereoscopic footage was captured, ideally post-production would get either one or some of the following. 2 different sets of raw footage from each camera, left and right, basically simulating the left and right eye of a human. Yes, it's really just that. I mean, you can try it right now. Try it. Close your left eye, and then close only your right eye. And voila, you have that stereo disparity, which real-life left and right cameras try to recreate. Anyway, a metadata log of all the camera settings used from the stereoscopic camera, and all actual depth layered stereoscopic footage that was captured as intended, most likely to be adjusted in the stereo camera provider's own proprietary tool to adjust its depth. After you have these basic materials, your job as a visual effects soup is to ensure that the director's idea and layout of depth is relayed to the post soup of the person in charge of adjusting and setting the depth of each selected shot. Of course, everything else in visual effects is pretty much the same, with the exception that additional depth data would be added to the visual effects elements applied, or the visual effects artists would work directly on top of the depth data, doing a bit of stereoscopic compositing on top of the layered depth footage itself. In general, since stereoscopic productions generally involve working with double or more complex footage, this would then of course double the amount of work in post-production, usually also doubling the amount of time needed to see through post-production. Either way, once all visual effects work is done, whichever route the studio chose to do it, the depth footage, or right and left eye footage, would then be reviewed and then sent back to the editor of the film, much like any typical film production. We'll cover the editor's workflow after this lesson, so no worries if this seems a little bit confusing for now. On that note, unless you are the post soup or stereoscopic post soup, you need not worry about the nitty-gritty of the process and workflow, as long as you ensure that the depth captured on set or the depth intended for each shot is exactly as is in each final 3D shot coming out from the visual effects studio. That there are no stereo breaks in the shot, which would cause the viewer any eye aches or confusion in the depth that they are seeing on screen. All this, of course, would most likely be captured during 3D shot reviews where yourself, the visual effects post soup, stereoscopic post soup, Producers and director would each have a go at various rounds to review and approve the 3D shots, catching such broken depth shots before they even reach the eyes of your audiences. Now, if you'd like to learn more, I've attached a few links in the Resource tab to a 3D stereoscopic production company and a great article written by an industry veteran and acquaintance of mine, Mike Seymour, who probably does more justice in explaining the world of 3D as a seasoned expert in this niche. So, feel free to check out the Resources tab in this lesson for more information and learning on how stereoscopic productions and post work. So, now that we have stereoscopic production and post-production down, let's move on to what the tech industry and motion pictures industry are focused on today, with the emerging markets and trends of VR and cinematic dome production.